Allison Hughes had the world by the tail. She was married for 10 years to the best husband and father in the world, John Hughes. John was by far the most intriguing man she had ever met. He was the only one she had to chase. Allison was amazing, 10 out of 10, and she knew it. She was so used to guys hitting on her that when John didn't do it the first time she met him, she was stunned. It was at the university. Allison went to a fraternity party that John belonged to. She was having a good time and was thirsty. When she approached the tables with the punch bowls, there was a guy standing there pouring drinks. In Allison's mind, he was 6 or 7, and she wasn't surprised when he offered to pour her a drink. Allison always measured everyone's appearance on a scale of 1 to 10. "Hey, I'd love to give you a glass of punch. What kind of punch are you looking for?" said the guy with the punch bowl, looking straight into her eyes. "What would you recommend?" Allison answered. Pointing to the punch bowls from right to left, he explained the options to her. "It's just a punch. It's really, really good. This is the same punch with vodka. Serious amount of vodka, but if you drink it, you'll be fine. The last one, well, let's just say I don't recommend it to a beautiful woman like you. If you try this one, I'm not responsible for the consequences." Allison pointed to the vodka machine and waited in line. She heard so much that she was always interested in hearing something new. He had already called her beautiful, so the cue was next. When Allison said thank you, she was shocked. The guy serving the punch said, "You're welcome. I hope you enjoy the party." Then he turned and left. Allison had never been in this situation before. She also noted that this guy didn't even try to look at her ample cleavage. Stunned, she thought that he must be the wrong orientation or something like that. However, later at the party, she saw that this same guy was clearly chatting with some lucky girl, and he was showing all the usual signs of a normal guy. Allison was born in Kansas City and won a cheerleading scholarship to Wichita State University. She studied art, but really just wanted to be Mr. Bizarre, right, had to have a minimum of 7 credits and have money or a degree that leads to money and personality. Allison met a few people who might qualify, but she was intrigued by the guy with the punch bowl. The next time she saw him was at a football match. He sat with his friends quite close to where the cheerleaders were doing their thing. Many of the guys and girls sitting there were clearly not interested in football. The punch guy never seemed to look at her. It was unnerving. Allison noticed that one of the guys he was sitting with was in one of her classes, so the next time she saw him, she asked, "Hey, Sean, I saw you at the game last week. Who are you with? Have you come?" Sean responded, clearly pleased that this goddess was talking to him. "Oh, John, Chris, and Norbert." What's with the one who didn't seem to appreciate the cheerleaders? "Oh no, John Hughes is normal. He's a serious guy. He wants to get good grades and make millions. I swear he will do it. I've never seen such a purposeful guy." Sean then played his part. "Hey, how about you and I get coffee sometime?" Allison almost sighed at how unconvincing his line, said her usual, "We'll see," and left. This John guy was very intriguing and would be a good fit for Mr. Right. The next time his fraternity had a party, she went there. She stayed out of his sight until he approached the punch bowl, and she did so. Allison was stunned again when she walked over, and he told her, "Hey, I'd be happy to get you a glass of punch. What kind were you looking for?" Allison couldn't believe this was happening. He didn't remember her. To confirm this, she replied, "Is this the same choice you offered me last time?" He looked at her carefully and said, "I'm pretty sure I would remember someone as beautiful as you, but I don't think we've met before." So, pointing to the punch bowls, he said, "This is just a punch. It's really, really good. This is the same punch with vodka. Serious amount of vodka, but if you drink it, you'll be fine. The latter, well, let's just say I don't recommend it to most women. If you try it, I'm not responsible for the consequences." Allison was stunned. The guy didn't remember her. Incredible. She needed to get to know him better. However, after she said thank you, he again said good time to the party and left. She finally gave him her phone number. Another first for Allison. Then he didn't call. No guy who asked and actually got her phone number took more than 24 hours to call her, but Punch Bowl John took a week. The most amazing thing was that he asked her out on a date next Friday. Long story short, they dated, fell in love, and got married shortly after graduation. Children soon appeared, John Jr., or JJ, Betty Ann or Annie, and the youngest Chris. JJ was 8, Annie was 7, and Chris was 5. They were all in school now, which made Allison's double life much easier. John's company was doing well, and they had a beautiful home. You'd think that a great millionaire husband who was a wonderful father to her 3 wonderful children would be reason enough to have the world by the tail. However, in addition to this, Allison had 3 more lovers. She found the first one 3 years ago. JJ had a friend named Max, his father Andrew. He was a stay-at-home dad. His mother Bernice was a doctor, and her reading was clearly in the 8.5 to 9.5 range. Max and JJ started dating, and Andrew just idolized the ground Allison stood on. It used to be an easy seduction, and now she and Andrew had sex every couple of months. She met her second lover 2 years ago. John was with the children, and Allison went grocery shopping. Some guy who had a solid 7 hit her with his cart. This was a completely normal occurrence at the grocery store and was always followed by an apology and then the guy's turn. Allison was stunned when this one didn't. "Hey, you stupid idiot, watch where you're going with that cart." The guy told her, and she just looked at him with her usual disdain that she had for lesser mortals. He didn't give up. "What's the problem with you, beauty? Just because you won the looks lottery, you think you can beat us all. It's a joke. I wouldn't touch you. You must be a terrible lover and entitled bitch the rest of the time." For some reason, Allison was attracted to this, and a guy named Roger said that 1 in 20 women actually react this way. Allison replied, "Oh yes, listen to yourself. You probably haven't been with a woman for so long that you would even beg for a terrible mistress. People like you are only strong in words, but in reality they are dummies." The verbal duel continued for several minutes. Then the guy said to her with contempt, "You won't be able to resist finding out what you missed. If you want to find out, come to 23 Cedar Street after you finish your shopping." Allison couldn't believe this guy. No one had ever talked to her like that, and for some strange reason she knocked on the door at 23 Cedar Street 20 minutes later. Allison was hooked. She went to see Roger the day John left. Allison had a few close calls to discover her infidelity, but all the risk of these encounters was what she craved, along with rough sex. The last lover appeared 6 months ago. She and her friend Angela, went on a spa shopping weekend in Oklahoma City. While shopping, Allison met Roberto, an absolute 9.5 or 10. He was everything she originally wanted in a husband: handsome, rich, chic, extravagant, and cosmopolitan. Allison and John lived outside of Wichita. Roberto lived in Oklahoma City. It wasn't New York or Los Angeles, but it was still a city, the 8th largest in America. John may have dressed smart, but Roberto always looked like he belonged on a magazine cover. John made his first million by the time he was 30, but was not inclined to waste money on what he considered to be unnecessary things. Roberto spent money on a whim and had a house full of useless things. John didn't like being the center of attention. Roberto craved attention and attracted many fans, both men and women. Finally, John traveled for work and took Allison on nice trips, but Roberto went to the hottest spots in the world. Roberto loved to dress her in very expensive dresses and lingerie. He liked to show it to his rich friends. All in all, Roberto gave Allison the glitz and glamour that her beauty demanded, and once she got a taste of him and his life, she couldn't stop. She had visited him just a week ago when John was away on business again and Angela was covering for her. Perhaps the most exciting thing about Roberto was that Allison wore the lingerie he bought for her for John. John loved it when she wore lingerie, and Roberto always bought the best. Allison was going to wear Roberto's latest gift for John tonight as an anniversary surprise. Life continued to be wonderful for Allison. John often went on business trips, but it didn't bother her at all. This allowed her to have her own affairs, and her ideal world lasted 2 years. She didn't overdo it and loved her life with John. Allison was very careful. She didn't want to destroy her ideal world. Then, the day before their 12th wedding anniversary, Andrew called her on her burner phone. Roberto bought it for her, and only 3 people knew the number: Andrew, Roger, and Roberto. The burner phone apparently helped her keep her double life a secret. Andrew was in a panic because Bernice accused him of cheating. Apparently, someone said something to Bernice, and she immediately confronted him. He was in denial and didn't want to lose Bernice or become a part-time father to his 2 children, so their romance had to end. Allison asked him for details. She didn't care that the affair ended, but she wanted to make sure it didn't affect her marriage. Bernice and Andrew stayed together and seemed quite happy when Allison saw them together after the close call. Allison was careful and had no contact with Roger or Roberto for 4 months to make sure she was safe. John showed no signs of changing, and in fact he may have become even more loving than before. Sometimes she wondered why she even led a double life, since John was such a wonderful guy. But the attraction was too strong, and no matter how good John was, it did not stop her from resuming her activities. The next tragedy occurred 2 years later. Allison tried to contact Roger, but he did not answer. She couldn't understand what happened, and she missed having sex with him. It had been 7 months since she last saw Roger when she drove to 23 Cedar Street and knocked on the door. A sweet woman, 7 and a half, opened it with a child in her arms. When Allison asked about Roger, the woman said that he no longer lived here. He died about 6 months ago, hit by a drunk driver. Allison thanked her and left. Luckily, Allison and her friend Angela had another spa weekend planned soon, so her grief over losing Roger was softened by the wonderful time she spent with Roberto. An interesting thing happened when Allison wore the lingerie that Roberto bought her that weekend for John for their 14th anniversary. They made love, but something was wrong, or else. Allison briefly wondered what had come over John, but she, of course, never complained when he continued to do this every time she returned from Roberto. Life continued to be good for Allison. Her children were growing up quickly, and she saw a time when they would all leave home. John was a great husband and father. John encouraged her to do charity work, and Allison loved how people adored her. Therefore, there was no need to replace Andrew. John provided the sex that Roger had previously provided, without having to hide the traces of an affair. Of course, she also still had Roberto. Allison and Roberto were able to go to Las Vegas together, while John was on another business trip, and the children were in different summer camps. Angela held her regular phone and contacted her when the children or John called or texted. Angela would then send text messages composed by Allison. An excuse was made for not being able to call, and she got through without any problems. The trip was divine. In Oklahoma City, they remained cautious and did not appear in public. These were always private parties or events. In Vegas, they acted like a celebrity couple, and their gorgeous looks and designer clothes made some people even think they were celebrities. Then Allison got into trouble. She was on holiday with Roberto shortly before their 16th wedding anniversary. Allison and Roberto had just left a private party on Saturday night. As they exited the elevator on the parking level, Allison noticed that it was darker than when they arrived. One of the lights didn't work. Then it was terrible. Roberto was robbed and killed. Allison went into escape mode and ran. She ran outside and hailed a taxi. Taxi took me away to her car, and she went straight to the spa. Angela was surprised to see her so early, but did not ask questions. Allison didn't say anything. While Angel slept, Allison watched the news. It was described as a robbery gone wrong. The security camera was pointed in the wrong direction to see anything significant. The video quality of what was recorded was blurry because the lights weren't working. Police were searching for the killers and asking witnesses to come forward with information. Allison returned home and continued to follow the news for several weeks. The party she went to was with new friends who were used to seeing Roberto with different beautiful women, and Allison used her usual fake name. The story quickly fizzled out as there was no physical evidence or leads. Allison was never able to find a replacement for Roberto. Yes, she continued to go on spa weekends with Angela and used the internet to find lovers, but she never had the same relationship with them as she did with Roberto. Allison and John had been married for 24 years, and their last child was about to leave home. JJ had enrolled at a university in Texas and was about to graduate. Annie was in Chicago getting her law degree. Chris was planning to join the army. He would leave shortly before Allison and John set off on a month-long cruise in the Mediterranean. John promised her they would go on a cruise for their 25th anniversary, but with Chris leaving, he moved it to their 24th. Allison was delighted. The cruise had to stop at all the places she wanted to go: Monaco, Rome, Athens, Cannes, Corfu, Marseille, Mykonos. She couldn't wait. It was the day before they left, and John had not yet returned from his last business trip to untie loose ends, as he called it. There was a knock on the door, and when Allison opened it, there was a man in a cheap suit, barely a bee, standing in front of her, who asked if she was Allison Hughes. When Allison responded in the affirmative, he handed her an envelope and said, "You have received a subpoena." He took a photo and left. Allison opened the envelope, not knowing what to expect. Maybe someone is suing her over her charity work or something related to John's business. To her surprise, it was a divorce petition. She couldn't believe it. She thought it was a joke. She called John's cell phone, but it went to voicemail. She flipped through the document. The terms of the divorce were quite short. She received a house and $25,000 a year. This must be a joke, a very cruel joke, Allison thought. They were millionaires, and she had the right to more. When John didn't answer her call, she called his office. When she demanded to know where John was, she was left on the line. The conversation that followed gave her even more questions than answers. Someone named Bill answered the phone, and after politeness said that John was a consultant they used from time to time, and they weren't hiring him now. "How long was he a consultant for you?" Allison asked. "About 5 years since we bought the company," Bill answered. "What? Does he no longer own Hughes Tank Lining?" Allison was shocked. "That's right, my brother Bobby and I own the company, but we still call it Hughes Tank Lining." Allison muttered a quick goodbye and hung up. She called her children, but they were reserved and mysterious when she asked if they knew where their father was. John didn't have any parents to call, and Allison didn't know what else to do. She had a sleepless night. In the morning, she went to the office of the lawyer whose name was on the application. She was told that this was not a joke, and that she should hire a lawyer if she wanted answers to her questions. However, they handed her a letter that John instructed them to give to her. "Allison, I'm sure you're wondering what happened, but if you think about it, you'll understand what happened. I found out about your double life. All the joy and unicorns when you were with me, and then the cheating behind my back. Yes, I know everything about Andrew, Roger, and Roberto. I have pictures and videos of you and your lovers and your various affairs since then. I even provided photographs of your lovers to the children so that they would not doubt my story. Because of your infidelity, I started my own secret life. I didn't want to lose my business or my children in a divorce, and in the beginning I was stupid enough to still love you. However, my business suffered, and I started drinking and gambling and eventually lost it. I also spent our savings trying to heal my broken heart. But I didn't forget about the children. They always loved me the same way I loved them. I took care of them. Yes, I too lived a double life, continuing to behave the same way at home, but differently when I was away from my traitorous wife. If you're wondering what I did with the cruise tickets, I'm using them. My future wife and I will be enjoying our trip when you receive this letter. John. A month later, she was in her lawyer's office, and he said the last words you want to hear in her situation. "I'm sorry to say that, despite what you may think, everything is basically as John laid out in your letter. This is financially irrefutable. About 5 years ago, he adopted twins, Billy Hughes McPherson and Bobby Hughes McPherson. They bought the company from him after he brought it to the brink of bankruptcy. Our investigators discovered a lot of drunken gambling in Atlantic City and Vegas, and all of your money, although missing, is included in those losses. The $25,000 he gives you is half of his annual consulting fee at his former company. You get a pretty good deal with a house and half his salary. I would also say that it doesn't matter if he lost everything or hid it. He had 14 years to prepare, and he could very well hide the money. In general, we recommend that you sign the divorce as is, otherwise we will continue to represent you, but will now charge you by the hour. At this point, Allison actually shed a tear. She had the world in her hands, and now she has lost it. Allison signed the divorce. John Hughes was having the worst day of his life. He was married for 10 years and 10 days to the love of his life, Allison Hughes. Moments ago, his best client in St. Louis told him that his wife was cheating on him. John said goodbye and left the office building. He continued to replay what he had seen in his head. His wife Allison wore the same dress she wore on their 10th anniversary when she was with another man. This probably meant she was wearing lingerie for that guy too, which made John vomit. In a semi-catatonic state, he somehow ended up in a booth at Denny's. He just sat there, staring into space. The waitress serving his area couldn't help but wonder what tragedy had befallen this man. This waitress was Linda McPherson. She was a widow. She knew tragedy. Her husband David died 2 years ago in Afghanistan. She was just living on autopilot, trying to hold on for the sake of her twins, Bobby and Billy. Her world collapsed 2 years ago, and her parents helped her through those terrible early days. The man looked as broken as she was, and her heart went out to him. She was interested to know his story. John Hughes was born to poor parents in Wichita, Kansas. His parents' marriage broke down and John ended up in foster care. It was a terrible life until, at 16, he found himself in Tamanoff. Jonas Stamen was a real father figure to him, and John began working for Jonas at his tank company. John was ambitious and saved his money. He also received a scholarship for his high grades at Wichita State University. He continued to work during his time at the university, and the first 2 years passed quickly. In the third year, 2 events occurred that changed his life. First, Jonas Stamen told him that he had no intention of handing over his company to his useless children. He wanted to retire, and the lazy leeches didn't deserve the fruits of his labor. He suggested that John take over his clients and Jonas would close the business. Jonas would then provide a loan to John so he could purchase the building and inventory. John was popular and probably could have retained the staff. Although this made university more difficult, John accepted the offer. The second thing that happened was that he met the woman of his dreams. Her name was Allison, and she was beautiful, no doubt, but he fell in love with her at first sight. She was a tough catch, but John believed in the long game. He played with her and, without showing interest in her, aroused her interest in him. The look she gave him when they met for the second time, and he pretended not to remember her, was priceless. By the middle of her senior year, she was already his girlfriend, and they married shortly after graduation. If you had asked him 10 days ago, he would have said he had the world in his hands. Millionaire, under 30, excellent wife, and mother of his 3 children. He was living a dream. Then his best client in St. Louis showed him a photo of his wife Allison with another man. The photo came from a friend of a friend who loved to show off the beautiful ladies this guy always had on his arm. Allison told him she was on a spa shopping weekend in Oklahoma City, but that's not what he saw in the photo. He saw a couple clearly having fun together. According to a friend, she was the last conquest of this guy named Roberto. Linda continued to study the man, and when the end of her shift came, she made a decision. She approached him and said that she was taking him home. He followed her obediently, and after she paid the babysitter and put her boys to bed, she tucked him into bed. She took off only his shoes and then lay down next to him and hugged him all night. In the morning, she was surprised when she woke up and saw that he was no longer in her bed. When she opened her bedroom door, she found him playing Legos on the floor with her twins. She made everyone breakfast, and the conversation was led by Billy and Bobby and the man she brought home. She didn't even know his name. After breakfast, he cleared the table with her boys. They simply followed his example. Then, over coffee, he introduced himself as John Hughes and asked if he could stay until Monday. She wanted to know more before saying yes, and he told her his story. Then he wanted to know her story. Linda agreed for him to stay, and they all went on a picnic. It was summer, so the boys were out of school, and she didn't have to work until Monday. After an amazing time at a nearby park, playing and eating takeout with Linda and her boys, John sent his wife a text. "Unexpected problems at work. I won't be able to return until Monday. I'll call you in the evening." She replied, "Sorry to hear. I'm sure you'll work it out. Love you." John knew he had to hold back and play the long game with Allison again, so he wrote back, "Love you too." After the most fun she had had since her husband David's death, Sunday evening soon arrived and John had to leave in the morning. Linda knew that this man brought joy to her home, and especially to her boys, and she wanted to know his plans. After the twins went to bed, she sat next to him on the couch and asked, "John, what are you going to do?" John explained, "I'll play the long game, get the facts first. Then I will act. One thing is for sure, our marriage is over, and she will not receive a penny from my business. I won't get a divorce. I can't do this to the kids. I'll live a double life like she's clearly doing, and when the last kid leaves, I'll call it a day." John looked at her and saw how sadness covered her eyes again. "There is one more thing I am sure of. You and your boys have given me the strength to continue and fight. I know this may seem strange considering we just met, but I would love to be able to come back and see you three again." John saw the sadness disappear and hugged her. In short, Allison was very unlucky when John hired private investigators to find out everything about her. Detectives found Andrew first, then Roger, and finally Roberto, so within 6 months John knew about all three. He knew how long, what they did, where and how often they did it, but he had a hard time understanding why. At the same time, John continued to act as if nothing had changed. He tried to see what he clearly missed about his wife Allison, but he couldn't find it. Since he found out about her betrayal, she has remained the same loving wife and mother that she was before. Somehow she managed to separate her two lives. Andrew was the first one to be dealt with. Andrew disrespected him in his own backyard, so to speak. The children were involved in this affair, and it had to end. The private investigators believed, based on watching recorded videos, that Allison slept with him not for his own sake, but for the sake of her ego. They believed that Allison liked the fact of Bernice's betrayal. Andrew was simply a tool to boost her self-esteem. The problem with Andrew was solved when a female detective from the same company pretended to be a parent and told Bernice one day that she thinks Andrew is cheating on her. Bernice immediately confronted Andrew, who denied everything, cut off all contact with Allison, and tried to be the perfect husband. John would have liked to bury Andrew 6 feet underground, but it was too close to home and other people might get hurt. Andrew will never know how lucky he was to have been spared. John encouraged Allison to do charity work, and this solved her ego problems as the other volunteers adored her. Roger should not have expected the same leniency. John initially hoped that Roger would one day kill Allison because of their sex. However, this meant that his children would lose their mother, and despite hating Allison, he did not want that. John's research revealed that Allison was one of many women Roger abused at the same time. The private investigators found out everything they could about Roger's life. He was a predator and had to be stopped. John killed Roger. The police had no witnesses, and it looked like a drunken hit and run. There were no prints in the car except those of the owner. Roger was not a particularly nice person and had a criminal record with the Wichita police. The case was quickly closed. John didn't want Allison to find a substitute for the rough sex she was clearly demanding. John solved this problem by giving her what she needed. She seemed to really enjoy it, and detectives reported that she was now only cheating with Roberto. The problem with Roberto took more time and research to solve, and it took John and his detectives years to gather enough information to solve the problem. It turned out that Roberto became interested in one of the wives of the Oklahoma City crime boss. Roberto had had business connections with major players in the Oklahoma City underworld for years, but this new development gave John an opportunity. The money was handed over and Roberto was killed during the robbery. They didn't charge extra when one of the women of easy virtue called the police. She convincingly stated that she was with Roberto that night, but did not see anything and was scared, so she ran away. Her story contained enough detail for the police to believe it. With no other leads or evidence, the case was closed. It probably helped that the study revealed Roberto's wild lifestyle, which negatively affected investigators' opinion of him. However, John didn't know how to stop Allison from pursuing a life of luxury, and after the detectives hacked her Ashley Madison account, he just asked them to follow him. The children were growing up, and soon everything had to end. John's relationships with Linda, Billy, and Bobby grew stronger over the years. 6 months after he began visiting them regularly, Bobby asked him a question at the dinner table. "Mr. John, will you be our daddy?" John looked at Linda, whose expression was reserved, but he thought he saw hope, and then at Billy and Bobby, who seemed impatient for a positive answer. "No, Bobby, I can't be your daddy." The three faces darkened before he could continue. "I can never be your dad. That man in the uniform in the photo on the wall is your dad. He died for his country, and I can never take his place, and you must never forget him. He's your dad." This was clearly not the answer the three McPhersons wanted to hear, but John wasn't done yet. "But I would be happy to be your stepfather and try to live up to the standards your father set." There were now 3 very happy people around the table, even though Linda had tears in her eyes. Billy and Bobby told him "Good night, Daddy," when he put them to bed that night. Linda later approached him on the couch and asked him to make love to her. It was the first time they slept in the same bed since the night she saved him. In the morning, John looked into her eyes and told her he loved her. She replied that she loved him too and would agree to be a partial family with him until his long-term game was over. His children have been a big part of keeping him sane throughout this difficult process. When he was at home, he was always an exemplary father. John knew that his time with Linda and the twins was taking time away from his children, but the McPhersons were another factor that kept him from going crazy. Later, when he got rid of Allison, his children not only accepted John's second family, but also loved them. They understood that their father had to do what he had to do for them. John also took action regarding his business. He took drunk trips to casinos and used his company's money to buy scores of gaming chips. He made sure to lose large amounts of small chips. He converted large chips into cash, which went to the Cayman Islands. His accountant and lawyer were aware of his plans and assisted him in the disappearance of the money. This was made easier by his policy of doing his own bookkeeping. No one at Hughes Tank Lining knew anything about the money, and as long as wages were paid, they had no reason to ask questions. Billy and Bobby began working for him and showed real talent for business. John's children were not interested in the company, so he sold it to Billy and Bobby. Around the same time, they asked John to adopt them. John agreed, but only if they kept their father's surname and became Billy and Bobby Hughes McPherson. On his and Allison's 24th wedding anniversary, he was finally able to end his painful long-term game and pull the trigger. His last son, Chris, joined the army. Trust funds were set up for all of his children, and he was almost penniless. Allison thought they were going on a Mediterranean cruise to celebrate their anniversary and empty nest, but she was wrong. She was given divorce papers. John took Linda on a cruise and proposed to her in Rome. He ended up with a double life that he never wanted to live in the first place. Allison quickly sold her house and moved to Los Angeles. She was finally in a real city, and since she was well preserved, she had no problems finding partners. She married a man named Larry Hudson, who was a dozen years older, but still very handsome, and very rich. For 10 years, she remained faithful, traveling and living the life she had always dreamed of. Then, as Larry's health began to deteriorate, she began cheating again. She was very careful, and Larry died of a heart attack, unaware of her infidelity. Allison continued to live the life of a wealthy widow. The only thing that darkened her cloudless life was Gramaline. Gramaline, that's what her grandchildren called John's second wife, Linda. According to Allison, she was a 2, but a 7 to everyone else. Her grandchildren told her about their adventures with Grampolino and Gramaline. John and Linda always spit on Allison, and she hated it. For example, Allison took her grandchildren to Disneyland in Anaheim, but John and Linda, Grumple and Gramelin, took them to Disneyland in Tokyo. Allison took them skiing in Lake Tahoe for a week, and Grample and Grameline took them all Christmas holidays skiing in the Alps. Apart from this irritation, Allison had no regrets. Their divorce was John's loss. John had regrets, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that he sometimes reconsidered his past decisions. He wondered if he should have done things differently. Maybe I should have just gotten a divorce right away. Killing people, even if they deserved it, leaves scars on the soul. However, he always came back to the fact that he had an excellent relationship with 5 well-adjusted children and 9 precious grandchildren. Most importantly, he was married to the real woman of his dreams, not a monster who wouldn't even call 911 for his dying lover. Life was good. John had the world in his hands. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click